When we talk about tariffs, most people think of them as dry economic instruments, percentages tacked onto imports and exports, numbers in spreadsheets, negotiations in policy rooms. But the truth is, tariffs are never just about economics. They are a form of leverage, a silent but forceful weapon in international relations. When a country like the United States imposes tariffs on India, it isn't merely adjusting the price of goods, it is making a statement, sending a signal, and testing the boundaries of India's will. Tariffs in this sense are psychological as much as they are financial. They are designed to bend, to pressure, to provoke. And when you look beyond the technicalities, what you see is a very old game. The use of economic power to influence political outcomes. India finds itself at a critical juncture in this game. The tariffs hitting its exports are not accidental. They are calculated. They are meant to disrupt industries, unsettle farmers, strain supply chains, and force India into making concessions it would otherwise resist. But this is where the real contest lies, not in the immediate losses that tariffs might inflict, but in how a nation responds to that provocation. Will it retreat, adjust its identity to fit the demands of stronger powers, or will it use the challenge as fuel to carve out a stronger, more independent stance in the global order? To understand this, you have to view tariffs not as static numbers, but as dynamic forces of pressure. They are meant to test resilience. A weaker nation might bow quickly, prioritizing short-term relief over long-term sovereignty, but India's strength lies in its refusal to view itself as weak. There is a defiance in digging in saying that economic bullying cannot be allowed to determine the trajectory of a nation's growth. That stance is costly, yes, but it is also powerful, because dignity always has a price, and those willing to pay it inevitably gain strength that cannot be bought. If we step back and consider the psychology at play, the picture becomes even clearer. Tariffs are intended to create doubt, to whisper into the national psyche. You cannot withstand this, you need to yield. But India has faced whispers like this before. For centuries, stronger powers have tried to reduce its confidence, to fracture its unity, to make it question its ability to stand on its own. And yet, history shows a pattern. Every time India is pushed to the wall, it responds with a new surge of resilience, a deeper resourcefulness, and a greater determination to chart its own course. So when we call this moment India digging in against a tariff hit, we are not just describing an economic response. We are describing a deeper human response, the will of a nation to resist being shaped by the will of another. The numbers matter, yes, but the meaning matters more. Tariffs are weapons, but resilience is armor. And when a nation chooses to wear that armor, it declares to the world that its dignity is not for sale. And so the question is not how much these tariffs cost, but what they reveal. They reveal India's stance, its spirit, its willingness to pay the price of sovereignty. And in that revelation lies the seed of something greater, the recognition that real power is not in avoiding blows, but in standing firm when they land. That is the essence of resilience, and it is the essence of dignity. Because in the end, tariffs are temporary, but the strength forged by resisting them, that is permanent. When you look at the present, with India facing the sharp edge of tariff pressures, it is tempting to imagine this as something unprecedented, something entirely new in its intensity. But to understand the weight of this moment, you have to step back into history. India has always been forced to navigate economic storms, some of them far more devastating than tariffs, and what is remarkable is not just that it survived them, but that it came out of each with a deeper sense of resilience. That history is not a relic, it is a resource, a reminder that this is not the first time India has been tested, and it will not be the last. Think of the colonial period. India was not merely taxed, it was systematically drained of wealth. Its resources, its industries, and its farmers were subjected to a kind of economic exploitation that makes modern tariffs look tame in comparison. The nation endured famine, heavy levies, and economic policies deliberately designed to keep it weak and dependent. And yet, even under that immense pressure, the seeds of self-reliance were sown. Local industries adapted, communities tightened their bonds, and the spirit of resistance was sharpened. It was precisely in that crucible of economic struggle that India's hunger for independence was forged. After independence, the story continued. The early years were defined by food insecurity, chronic shortages, and the fear of dependence on foreign aid. But rather than yielding to despair, India turned toward innovation. The Green Revolution transformed its agricultural landscape, proving that necessity truly is the mother of invention. Then came the oil shocks of the 1970s, and once again India found itself reeling under external pressures. Yet, instead of collapsing, it adjusted, diversified, and pressed forward. In the 1990s, when balance of payment crisis threatened to choke the nation, India did not crumble. It liberalized, restructured, and launched itself into a new era of growth. Each of these chapters tells us something profound. India's identity is not one of fragility, but of adaptability. And adaptability is the highest form of strength. Tariffs may bite. They may strain industries and unsettle markets, but they are far less destructive than the crisis India has endured before. What matters is not the blow itself, but the response, and if history is any indication, India's response has always been to transform constraint into creativity. Psychologically, this matters because nations, like individuals, often forget their own strength in the heat of present struggles. It is easy to believe the narrative of vulnerability when external forces try to impose it on you. But history is the antidote to that narrative. It reminds us that we have endured worse, and we have not just endured, but grown stronger because of it. So when tariffs arrive at India's doorstep today, they are not the beginning of a collapse. They are merely another test in a long line of trials. And if the past has taught us anything, it is that every test leaves behind a stronger, more self-reliant India. That is the deeper truth. Pressures may change in form, but resilience remains the constant. And the lesson for us is clear. Do not measure a nation's future by the weight of its current burdens, but by the depth of strength it has proven across its history. And India's history has already made one thing undeniable: it was built to withstand storms. When we talk about the tariff struggle, it is easy to get lost in numbers. Trade deficits, export losses, shifts in global demand. But beneath those statistics lies something far more human, far more elemental: agriculture. For India, farming is not just an economic activity, it is the very fabric of society. Nearly half the population depends on agriculture for its livelihood. Generations are tied to the soil, not just for survival but for identity. To threaten that through external economic pressure is to strike at the heart of what sustains India as a civilization. This is what makes India's refusal to compromise on farm interests so critical. To outsiders, it may appear as stubbornness or protectionism. But to India, it is about safeguarding the foundation upon which millions stand. A farmer in Punjab sowing wheat, a family in Andhra tending rice fields, a herder in Rajasthan guiding livestock through arid lands. All of these are not mere participants in a marketplace. They are the guardians of continuity, the keepers of a way of life that links past to present and ensures that the nation does not lose sight of its roots. Tariffs that target agricultural exports or disrupt input costs do not simply shift prices on a global index. They threaten food security, rural stability, and social cohesion. And when those are shaken, the nation itself feels the tremors. This is why India digs in, because defending the farmer is not about short-term economics. It is about ensuring that the heartbeat of the nation continues to beat steady and strong. There is also a deeper philosophical dimension here. Agriculture represents a relationship between human beings and the land they live on. It is not transactional, it is existential. A society that allows its farmers to be undermined for the sake of external approval risks losing more than revenue. It risks losing its sense of meaning. For India, defending agriculture is therefore not a narrow policy choice, but a civilizational imperative. It says, we value the people who feed us more than we value the comfort of appeasing external powers. Psychologically, this stance matters because it reflects a prioritization of human dignity over abstract numbers. You cannot talk about national strength while leaving your farmers exposed. You cannot speak of resilience if the very hands that grow food are forced into despair. Protecting agriculture is protecting the collective morale of the nation. It ensures that in times of global turbulence, India remains anchored to its own soil, unshaken in its identity. So when tariffs are imposed and the world expects India to yield, the choice is clear. India will not compromise its farmers because in doing so, it would compromise itself. The defense of agriculture is not just an economic policy, it is a declaration of who we are. And that is the deeper message: as a nation that forgets its roots cannot stand tall. But a nation that defends its farmers defends its soul. When a nation is struck with tariffs, the first instinct might be to see it as a closed door, as if avenues of trade and growth have suddenly narrowed. But India's response reveals a deeper truth: every closed door is also a push to discover new pathways. Tariffs may be intended to limit, to confine, but India has chosen to view them as invitations to adapt, to diversify, and to expand beyond dependence on a single corridor of opportunity. This is not just economic strategy, it is a philosophy of resilience. Consider the nature of trade in a globalized world. If one nation attempts to corner you, to use economic pressure as leverage, your greatest strength lies in refusing to be cornered at all. That means cultivating multiple partnerships, widening networks, and building self-reliance so that no single blow can cripple your system. India has been steadily moving in this direction, expanding ties across Asia, Africa, and Europe, strengthening its role in regional forums, and seeking out alliances that reduce vulnerability to unilateral economic aggression. In doing so, it communicates something profound. Dependence is weakness, but diversification is strength. There is also a psychological depth here. Tariffs are meant to create the illusion of scarcity, to make a nation believe it has no alternatives, no room to maneuver. But by actively seeking new partners and new avenues, India refuses that illusion. It reminds both itself and the world that it cannot be trapped. This mindset shift is as important as the policies themselves, because resilience always begins in thought before it manifests in action. Alongside diversification comes self-reliance, not in the sense of isolation, but in the sense of building internal capacity strong enough that external shocks cannot destabilize the nation. India has already begun investing in technology, in renewable energy, in digital infrastructure, in strengthening its manufacturing base. These are not reactive measures, they are proactive moves toward a future where tariffs lose much of their sting. For when a nation produces, innovates, and sustains itself from within, external threats diminish in significance. And let us not overlook the deeper philosophical current here. Every great power in history has known that survival depends not on submission to immediate pressures, but on the capacity to turn constraints into catalysts. Tariffs, then, are not roadblocks but training grounds. They test whether a nation has the creativity, the will, and the unity to reinvent itself under stress. By diversifying and building from within, India demonstrates that it will not only survive these pressures, it will evolve through them. So the real story is not that India faces tariffs, but that tariffs are accelerating its transformation. What was meant as a blow has become a spark, and that spark, if nurtured, can light the path toward greater independence and influence. Because the truth is simple: those who adapt cannot be broken. And India, by choosing diversification and self-reliance, has made it clear it will not be broken. When we think about tariffs and economic warfare, it's tempting to imagine that the real battle is fought in trade negotiations, in boardrooms, or in the numbers that economists analyze. But the deeper battle is psychological. Tariffs are designed not only to strain industries and shift balances of trade, but to weaken confidence, to make a people question their resilience, to create doubt about whether they can endure. And once doubt takes root, it does more damage than any percentage of tax ever could. This is why the greatest strength a nation can possess in such moments is not merely policy but mindset, a collective conviction that it will not be shaken. India has always understood this truth at a fundamental level. When external forces attempt to pressure the nation, the immediate response is not only strategic adjustments but also a renewal of unity. It is this unity that transforms what could have been fractures into fortitude. The very act of standing together, of refusing to let outside pressure divide, becomes an act of resistance more powerful than any retaliatory tariff. Because once a people believe they can withstand the storm, they already have. The philosophy here is simple yet profound. Strength is not just in resources, but in the belief that those resources, however limited, are enough when wielded with determination. Psychological resilience is the armor that turns suffering into sacrifice and pressure into progress. When tariffs are imposed, India's response is not just to count losses but to count on itself. That act of trust in one's own capacity is what prevents despair from taking hold. And this is not mere optimism. It is a pattern history has confirmed. Each time India has faced external coercion, be it colonial exploitation, famine, or global crisis, the turning point has always come when its people refused to internalize defeat. Once that refusal was established, solutions emerged, opportunities arose, and the struggle itself became the soil from which growth sprang. The mind, then, is not a secondary battlefield, it is the primary one. This is why tariffs, though material in appearance, are first and foremost psychological tests. They ask, will you falter or will you harden? Will you see in this moment only loss, or will you find within it the chance to deepen your unity and expand your resilience? For India, the answer lies in choosing unity, in transforming the imposed burden into a shared cause, in making every challenge a call to greater solidarity. And perhaps that is the lesson for each of us as well. In our own lives, pressures often arrive disguised as limitations, setbacks, or obstacles. The question is rarely whether we have the tools to endure, but whether we can summon the belief that we do. Just as a nation can withstand tariffs through unity and resilience, so too can individuals withstand their trials by refusing to let doubt dictate their response. Because in the end, the true test is not whether pressure arrives, it always does. The true test is whether we let it break us, or whether we allow it to build us into something stronger. And strength born of unity is a strength no outside force can dismantle. At the deepest level, what tariffs reveal is not merely an argument over trade, but a larger struggle over power and dignity in the global order. every time a stronger nation imposes tariffs on a weaker one. There is an unspoken message: submit, adjust, accept your place. The purpose is not only to extract economic concessions but to shape identity, to make one nation live in the shadow of another's will. And this is where the true test lies, not in the mechanics of trade balances, but in the moral question of how a nation chooses to define itself under pressure. India's refusal to yield easily is significant precisely because it elevates the debate beyond numbers. It is a statement that says dignity cannot be measured in percentages or purchased with temporary relief. To endure pain now rather than surrender principle is a choice that carries weight far beyond economics. Because in a world where power is often exercised through coercion, the ability to resist is not simply resistance. It is a declaration of sovereignty. It is the refusal to be written into someone else's narrative of dominance. This is a deeply philosophical choice. Nations, like individuals, are constantly confronted with moments where they must decide between comfort and character. It is always easier to compromise, to yield, to avoid the discomfort of struggle. But comfort without dignity is hollow, and relief purchased at the cost of self-respect leaves wounds that take generations to heal. By digging in against tariffs, India affirms that sovereignty is not negotiable, that independence is worth the price of temporary hardship, and that power in its truest form is not in domination but in the refusal to be dominated. There is also a psychological element that extends to the global stage. Other nations are watching. The world takes note of how a country responds when pressured. If it yields quickly, it sets a precedent: push harder next time. But if it holds its ground, it sends a different message entirely. That coercion will not bend it, that it has a spine, and that even under strain, it will chart its own course. In this sense, resistance becomes not just self-defense, but also a form of deterrence. And perhaps this is where the lesson becomes universal. For what applies to nations also applies to us as individuals. Life will always present situations where we are tempted to trade dignity for ease, where yielding seems simpler than standing firm. But the deeper truth is that who we are is defined not by what we accept when things are easy, but by what we refuse when things are difficult. So when India digs in against the weight of tariffs, it embodies a principle that resonates far beyond geopolitics: that dignity, once surrendered, is almost impossible to reclaim, and that the cost of resistance, however steep, is always less than the cost of submission. Because in the end, power fades, economies shift, alliances change, but dignity endures. And a nation, like a person that refuses to sell its dignity, will never truly be defeated.